Linnet Ashby tore the diamond off her finger and threw it at the chest of a man she had never met. He caught it out of the air without blinking, without raising his voice, and set it down on the table as carefully as if it were somebody's ashes. She told him to take it back. He told her she had signed her name at 3:11 that morning, and that this was the only reason she was still alive, to throw anything at anybody. Subscribe, stay with Linnet to the very last minute, and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels tonight. The first thing Linnet Ashby noticed was that her mouth tasted like pennies. The second thing was the weight on her left hand. She did not move. Some animal part of her had already made the decision for her that if she kept her hand exactly where it was, whatever was on it would not be real. She lay there and counted her own heartbeats the way she counted the pauses in a deposition when the recorder ran slow. She got to 9. Then the panic arrived all at once. The way a wave takes a swimmer's legs out from under her. And she was sitting up before she had agreed to sit up. She said the word okay out loud twice to nobody. Her voice came out sanded down at the edges, and she understood immediately what that meant. She had been screaming at some point. She could not remember when. That frightened her more than anything else in the room. She checked herself the way a person checks a car after a wreck. Arms, legs, ribs, nothing hurt in a way that mattered. Her hair was still pinned exactly as she had pinned it Friday afternoon, 2 bobby pins crossed at the back. A habit 15 years old, from the years she used to sit in a courtroom for 8 hours without moving her head. She pressed them with her thumb and felt something absurdly close to relief. Whatever had happened, she had not been gone long enough for her hair to come down. Then she turned her arm over and saw the bruise inside her left elbow. Small, purple. One dark dot at the center of it. She was on her feet before she decided to be. The floor tilted. She caught the bedpost and breathed in for 4 and held for 4 and let it out for 6. The thing she taught nervous witnesses to do before they took the stand. And it did absolutely nothing. Because this was not nerves. This was her body understanding something her mind had not caught up to yet. Friday came back in pieces, and the pieces did not fit. Front Street, Britt Kesner's bachelorette. 12 women in matching sashes, and Linnet in the middle of them, like a chaperone who had wandered onto the wrong field trip. She had gone, because Britt cried on the phone, and Linnet Ashby had never once in her life managed to say no to a crying friend. There had been a bar with red lights. There had been somebody's phone playing something too loud. There had been cold air off the river, and Britt shoving a white jacket at her and telling her to stop being a martyr about it. After that, there was nothing. Not a taxi, not a door, not a single frame. She looked at the ring. It was not costume. She had sat through enough insurance disputes to know the difference between a stone that catches light and a stone that holds it. She went to the bedroom door, expecting it to be locked, and it opened. That stopped her cold in a way the ring had not. A locked door she could have understood. A locked door had a shape, a meaning, a plan behind it. An unlocked door meant somebody had thought about it and decided she was not worth locking in, or that she had nowhere on earth to run to. The woman in the hallway was somewhere around 60, silver hair, hands folded in front of her with the absolute unhurried calm of a person who had seen worse mornings than this one. She said, "Good morning, ma'am," and asked whether Linnet wanted to sit down before she asked anything. Linnet asked where she was. The woman told her the Ruvolo house, the historic district Wilmington, North Carolina, 4 blocks up from the river. Linnet's stomach turned over. She was still in her own city. She had been 20 minutes from her own apartment this entire time. And somehow that was worse, because it meant nobody had needed to take her far. She asked where her phone was. Charging in the study. She asked who had called. Her friend Britt 9 times, and Britt had already been told that she was safe. Linnet said then let her tell Britt herself, and the woman said, "Of course, after." Linnet asked after what? The woman's eyes moved. Once. Down to Linnet's left hand. And she began to say a name, some version of Mrs. Ruvolo, and Linnet heard her own voice come out of her chest like a whip crack and startle both of them. She told the woman not to call her that. She told her that her name was Linnet Ashby, that she was a court stenographer at the county courthouse, that she typed down other people's worst days for a living, and went home and ate cereal, standing up over the sink, that she had a 14-year-old sister who could not be left alone with the stove, and that she had never in her life met anyone named Ruvolo. And she told her that if that name was said to her one more time, she was going to start screaming, and she was not going to stop. The housekeeper did not flinch. She nodded slowly, as if this were an entirely reasonable set of terms. She said her name was Iolanda. She asked whether Linnet wanted coffee first or answers first. Something in Linnet's chest went unsteady at being offered a choice. Any choice at all. She said answers. She was standing when he came in, and she hated that she noticed anything about him at all. Black suit cut close, white shirt open at the collar, and where the collar fell away, there was ink, a line of it climbing the side of his throat and disappearing down. 2 days of beard trimmed to look careless by somebody very careful. A heavy silver watch that he turned once around his wrist when she walked in and then stopped, like he had caught himself doing it. She had expected a smirk. She had spent 20 minutes building a man in her head who would smirk. He looked like somebody who had not slept in 30 hours. He said her first name, and that was when she did it. The ring fought her coming off. It had been sized right. And that was the detail that broke something loose in her, because being sized right meant somebody had measured her. And being measured meant time and time. Meant she had been unconscious in front of strangers long enough for a jeweler's decision to get made. She threw it at his chest with everything she had. He caught it out of the air with one hand. He did not flinch, and he did not raise his voice. He said he could not take it back. She told him he would. Her voice climbed, and she let it climb. She told him she did not know him, that she had not agreed to anything, that she did not remember his face or his name or getting into any car, and that she had spent 20 minutes standing in a stranger's bedroom, looking at a needle mark inside her own elbow, and thinking every single terrible thought a woman is capable of thinking, and that he was going to tell her right now what was in her. He told her the name of the drug flatly, the way a man reads a lab result, and said it had been in her drink Friday night in a dose meant for a woman twice her size. He said there had been fluids and a tox screen, and that the screen came back before dawn. The room went quiet in a way that had weight to it. Linnet put her hand on the back of a chair, not to sit, to hold on to something that was bolted to the world. She asked him to say it again. He said she had been drugged. His jaw moved. He said it had not been him, and not by anyone under this roof. And then he said the part that took the floor out from under her, that it had not been for her either. She asked what that meant. He said they had wanted the woman in the white jacket with the VIP badge around her neck. Linnet heard a sound come out of herself that was almost a laugh, and she said Britt's name twice, and he nodded, and he told her the rest with no softening anywhere in it. Britt Kesner's father owned 3 hotels and owed money to people who did not take checks. 48 hours with his daughter would have settled the account, and he said the last quietly. Linnet had been cold, and her friend had handed her a coat, and that was the entire mechanism. She said that was not a reason. She said that was a coincidence. He agreed. He said coincidences kill more people than bullets do. She asked who he was, and he gave her a name, Gaspare Ruvolo, and she told him a name was not an answer. Something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not a smile, so much as an acknowledgement that she was right. He told her his family had moved cargo through this port for 61 years, some of it legal, and that he was trying to make all of it legal, which was the most dangerous thing he had ever attempted in his life, and that he had 90 days left to survive doing it. He laid his palm flat on the table and said that was more than he had told anyone outside his own blood in 11 years, and that he was telling her because she was about to ask him 20 more questions, and he did not want to spend the morning lying to her. Linnet stared at him a long moment. Then she lifted her bare left hand and pointed at the ring lying on the wood between them, and asked about that. He did not answer. She asked again, and her voice came apart down the middle. She told him his housekeeper had called her his wife, and that whatever it was he needed to say it fast because she had spent 10 minutes upstairs talking herself out of going through a window. He told her she had married him at 3:11 yesterday morning at a chapel out past the bridge, that it was legal, that it was filed, and that it was the only reason she had woken up in a bed instead of a shipping container. Linnet sat down. She had not meant to. Her body simply made the decision without consulting her. She said she did not remember. He said he knew. She said she did not remember any of it. Not a car, not a chapel, not signing her own name. And her name was the one thing in this world she had never gotten wrong. He said he knew, and that was the part he could not fix. He pulled out the chair opposite and sat down heavily, with both hands on the table. And for 1 second he did not look dangerous at all. He looked 38 years old and gutted. He asked if she wanted it in order. She did. He told her there had been a van on the side street off front. 2 men and a driver. He had been there for something else entirely. He had seen the coat and the badge, and he had made 1 phone call, and his people had taken her out of that van 11 seconds before it moved. He said it without music in it, no heroism anywhere in his voice. He said she had been conscious barely, that she kept apologizing to everyone, and that she kept saying she had to get home because her sister had a science fair project due. Linnet's eyes went hot. She said her sister's name. He said it back to her. He said she had said it 9 times and that he had counted. She told him to stop counting things. He said it was the only thing he was good at. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, furious at it, and told him not to be charming, that he did not get to be charming this morning. He said understood and kept going. He told her the problem. The men in that van had seen her face. There were 3 between the bar and the corner. By 4 in the morning, the people who had paid for that van knew that a woman they had marked had been pulled out of it by a Ruvolo. And then his voice dropped a register, and he told her that in his world there was exactly 1 category of woman. Nobody was permitted to touch, not out of chivalry, but out of arithmetic, because touching her started a war that cost more than she was worth. Linnet's throat closed. She said the word wife. He said yes. He told her that he had driven her to a chapel and woken her up and asked her exactly one question, because she had maybe 30 seconds of clarity in her, and he was not going to spend them on an explanation. He held her eyes and told her what the question had been. He had asked her whether she wanted to live. The silence went on until it hurt. She said that she had said yes. He said she had said yes. She had signed. And then she had asked whether there was cake. He did not smile when he said it. He said there had not been any. Linnet put both hands over her face and stayed there. And he let her. He did not fill the silence. He did not reach across the table, did not offer her water or a tissue or one single soothing word. And somehow that was worse, because it meant he understood exactly how bad this was and refused to insult her by making it smaller. When she lowered her hands, her eyes were red and her voice was level. She told him he should have taken her to a hospital. He said a hospital was a public record, and a public record was an address. She said he should have called the police. He told her the name of the officer whose call it would have been, and how long that man had been on his uncle's payroll. She said then he should have waited 8 hours, and asked her sober like a human being. And she brought her palm down on the table, hard enough to make the ring jump. He said she had not had 8 hours. He said that was the whole answer, and that he knew it was not good enough, and that he had known it was not good enough since 3:11 the previous morning. Linnet laughed one ugly note, with nothing funny in it, and asked whether he wanted her to thank him. He said no. And then he said the thing that stopped her, because he said it before she could, that it sounded like a rescue when he told it that way, and that it was not one. That she had woken up in a strange house in clothes she had not put on, with a ring she had not chosen, and a legal document carrying her signature, and no memory of consenting to any of it. She asked if he knew the word for that. He said yes. He said he had known the word the entire time. He reached inside his jacket and put a folder on the table and slid it across. It was an annulment, signed by him. Dated yesterday, notarized at 7 o'clock that morning. There was an attorney's card clipped to the front, a woman named Roselle Tandy, and he said she was expensive and that she did not like him. He said Linnet could call her from any phone in this house, and that the marriage would be over in 11 business days, and that he would not contest a single line of it. Linnet stared at the folder like it might bite her. She said he was serious. He said there was a pen in the fold. She said he had told her he needed a wife for 90 days. She said he had called it the most dangerous thing he had ever attempted. He said he needed a name on a document, not a woman in a cage, and that those were different things, and that he would rather lose everything he was building than let himself confuse them. His hand flattened on the table, and he told her she was not property, that she never had been, that she was a woman in a borrowed coat who had walked into the middle of somebody else's debt. She pulled the folder toward her and opened it. The pen was there, clipped exactly where he said it was, her name typed across the top, Linnet Marie Ashby, and beside it in the same cold font his. She thought, I have known this man's middle name for 4 seconds, and he is the only living person who knows what happened to me on a Friday. She picked up the pen. He said there was one more thing he had to say. She uncapped it and told him no, that he had had his turn, that she was signing this and then calling her sister, and then going home to have a nervous breakdown in a room she paid rent on. He said her name. She told him not to say her name like he knew her. He told her to sign it. He said he meant that, but to hear the sentence first, because if she walked out without it, he would spend the rest of his life knowing he had let her. Her hand stopped. The pen hovered a quarter inch above the line. She told him to say it fast. He said the people who had paid for that van did not stop because a plan failed. They stopped when there was nothing left to clean up. He said she had seen two faces, and that right now she was the only living person outside this house who could put those men in a room with a lawyer. He said she could file that annulment and be Linnet Ashby again by the end of the month. And then he said the rest of it, and it landed like a hand on the back of her neck, that Linnet Ashby was not protected by anything at all. She said that was a threat. He said it was a description, and for the first time there was heat under his voice when he said that he wished to God it were a threat, because a threat he could take back. Her hand shook so badly, the pen tapped the paper twice. She asked how long. Hypothetically, if she stayed. He said 90 days. He said there was a vote at the end of it, and after that, he would have enough legitimate weight to make her untouchable without a ring, and she would never have to see him again unless she chose to. She asked what he got. He said a wife on paper for a room full of old men who still thought that word meant something. She asked what she got. He said her life. And anything else she named: money, a different city, a car, a last name that was not his. She said she did not want his money, and something crossed his face that looked absurdly like confusion. He said everyone wanted the money. She told him he had been talking to the wrong people his entire life. She looked down at the page, at her own name, at the ring throwing small pieces of light across the paper. And she thought about her sister, 14 years old, nobody else on this earth. And she thought, if I stay, I'm a coward, and if I leave and I'm wrong, she's alone. Linnet Ashby set the pen down on the line and told him for the record that she hated him. He said that was reasonable. She said she meant it. She said she hated that he had been right about the van, and that he had had a doctor waiting, and that he had counted how many times she said her sister's name. And she said she hated most of all that it had worked. Then she pressed the pen down and told him she was not going to be a woman who signed her entire life over to a stranger twice in 2 days. So she was going to sign this and go home and be careful, and that would have to be enough. His phone lit up on the table between them. It buzzed once, face up. Neither of them meant to look. Both of them did. It was a photograph taken from across a street, through a car window blurred at the edges, the way a long lens blurs things. A girl in a gray hoodie coming down a set of school steps, backpack over one shoulder, laughing at something a friend had just said. Dark hair that had never once sat right. A folder clutched against her chest. 4 words underneath it. Charlotte, 3:42 this afternoon. The pen slid out of Linnet's fingers and rolled off the table, and she heard it hit the floor from somewhere very far away. He was already standing, and every trace of that terrible patience was gone out of his voice when he said her name. She could not look at him. She was looking at her sister's face. She said flat and small and that those were the west doors at Fairhaven, that Poppy had chemistry last period on Thursdays, that she always came out the west doors. She said her sister was laughing. He said he knew. She asked how he knew. He said because it was 3:50 and that photograph had been taken 8 minutes ago. Her head came up and she was on her feet with both hands flat on the table, and her voice had turned into something she had never once heard come out of herself. She told him to call someone. He had people. He had people who pulled a woman out of a van in 11 seconds, so he could call them, and he could call them now. He said he already had, before she walked into this room, at 3:44. Then he turned the phone face down and left his hand on it and told her that was not the problem. She asked what the problem was. She asked why he was still standing there. She asked why he looked like that. He said that message had come from inside. She did not understand, and she said so. And Gaspare Ruvolo told her very quietly and very coldly, and not aimed at her at all, that the number belonged to him. That it was one of 6 phones he had issued himself in his own hand to 6 men who ate Sunday dinner at his mother's table. 6 phones, 6 men. Linnet said it out loud like she was reading a docket. And then she said the only thing that mattered, which was that 6 was a number, and numbers could be worked. So he needed to call all 6 of them right now, and whichever one did not pick up was the one. Gaspare said they would all pick up. He said that was what made them good. She asked him what they were supposed to do, and she did not hear herself say it, the we until it was already out. He heard it. He stopped halfway to the door and turned and looked at her for exactly 1 second and repeated the word back to her, not cruelly, just to be sure she knew she had said it. She did not take it back. She said her sister was 14 years old, standing on a sidewalk in Charlotte with a folder against her chest, and somebody carrying his phone number had taken her picture. So yes, we and he could either tell her what to do or get out of her way. Something moved in his face that was not gratitude and was not relief. It looked more like a man recalculating a number he had already run 4 times and getting a different answer. He called for a driver named Bo Tarleton, and the man who came in 90 seconds later was younger than Linnet expected, 26 maybe, built like a door with the tired politeness of somebody who had been raised to say, "Ma'am." Gaspar gave it to him in a flat string. Charlotte Fair Haven Academy. West entrance, 14-year-old female. Ashby. She was the priority, and she was the only priority. Take Marco's car and not his own. Do not call ahead. Do not tell dispatch. And then he said the part that made the kid's jaw tighten. Do not tell anybody in this house where you went. Beau's eyes flicked to Linnet and back. He asked carefully whether that meant anybody. Gaspare said anybody. Linnet watched the kid understand, and she watched something in him get older, in real time, and it made her stomach hurt in a brand new place. She stepped forward before she could talk herself out of it, and told him that her sister's name was Poppy, and that Poppy would not get in a car with a stranger because Poppy was not stupid. She said to tell her the blue guitar. Just that. She would know. Beau looked at her 1 second longer than he needed to, said the words back, and then he was gone, and the room was too quiet, and Linnet's legs finally stopped holding her up. She sat down hard and pressed both palms into her eyes and did not cry out of pure stubbornness. Gaspar told her the numbers because numbers were the only comfort he had. 16 minutes to the field, 90 in the air, eyes on her sister by 6. 2 hours. She said 2 hours where she sat in a chair. He said yes. He pulled out the seat across and said he knew it was the worst part and that it did not get better with practice. She asked how he would know. He said because he had done it. 11 years ago for his sister. He had sat in a room a lot like this one for 6 hours and aged about a decade. He turned the watch on his wrist once and stopped. He said she was fine, now that she was 36, and that she never let him forget it. Linnet wiped her face with the back of her hand and told him that if he did not keep talking, she was going to start doing math about what happened to Poppy if the man on that plane was the wrong man. He said Beau was not the wrong man. She said he did not know that. He said he did know that because Beau did not have one of the 6 phones. That stopped her. She asked who did. He was quiet a beat too long, and she watched him decide something. Then he laid them out like a hand of cards he hated. His uncle Marcantonio, his cousin, two men who ran the terminal, his mother's driver, and then a pause with a floor missing under it, and his brother-in-law. Linnet's head came up slowly. She said the words back to him, his sister's husband, the sister he had sat in a room for 6 hours over. He said yes. She let out a breath and said that whichever one it was, he was going to have to look that man in the face and no. He said no. He said he was going to have to look at 5 faces and know he was wrong about 4 of them and still not know which 4. Her phone came back to her at 4:15, and the first thing she did was call Britt, and the shriek went straight through her skull. Britt had called this police. Britt had called the courthouse. Britt was saying she vanished 1 second. She was at the bar, and then Kayla said she went out for air, and then she just... Linnet pressed her thumb hard between her eyebrows and asked one question. Had anybody asked about Britt that night? Anybody she did not know. The silence on the line was the wrong kind of silence. Britt asked why she was asking that, and her voice had gone thin and childish, and Linnet heard the truth arrive in it before Britt said a word. So Linnet said it plainly because Britt was going to hear it from somebody, and it was not going to be a stranger. A man had told her this morning that they meant to take Britt, and they took Linnet instead, because Linnet was wearing Britt's coat. The sound Britt made was small and terrible. She said her dad had been weird for a month. She said he kept calling it a cash flow thing. She said last week he had asked whether she could go stay at her aunt's for a while, and she had said no because of the wedding. Because of the stupid wedding. She said it twice. She said, Linnet, I gave you my coat, and then she said it again, and then she could not say anything at all. And Linnet Ashby sat at a stranger's table, with a diamond lying 3 feet away from her hand, and spent 11 minutes talking a bride down off a ledge. She told her that a man who owed money did this, that men who take women did this, that Britt had handed a cold friend a jacket, and that was the only thing she had done in the entire chain, and Linnet made her say it back. When she hung up, Gaspare was in the doorway. She asked how long he had been standing there. He said long enough. She told him to say whatever he was going to say. He said that most people on that call would have made it about themselves and that she had not done it once. She said Britt was her friend. He said he knew, and that was his point, and he set a coffee down beside her black no ceremony and went away again. Beau called at 5:51, and Linnet had the phone out of Gaspar's hand before he finished saying the kid's name. Poppy's voice cracked on the second syllable of her sister's name, the way it had for a year now. She said there was a guy, and he said blue guitar, and he knew about the blue guitar. So was he real? Linnet said he was hers. She said he was a friend. Poppy said with the flat teenage certainty that broke Linnet's heart that Linnet did not have friends who looked like that. Linnet laughed, and it came out shattered, and she said she did now. Then she asked, in the voice she used with witnesses who were about to say the thing they had been dreading, whether anything weird had happened today. Anybody talking to her, anybody hanging around after school, anybody in a car. Poppy went quiet, and that quiet was worse than anything else that had happened that day. She said slowly that there had been a guy at lunch outside the fence. She thought he was somebody's dad. He asked if she was Ashby's sister. Linnet asked her to say that again. Poppy said it again. He knew Linnet's name. He said it like he knew her Linnet's sister. Linnet asked what time. Poppy said around 12:30. 12:30. 3 hours before the photograph. which meant nobody had been surveilling her sister at 3:42. They had been standing at that fence since lunch. Linnet said, "Okay," very calmly, in the voice she used when a courtroom went sideways and somebody had to keep typing. She said, "Okay, baby." She said, "Here's what happens." She said Poppy was going to go with Bo and be in enormous pain about it, and he was going to take her somewhere safe, and Linnet would see her very soon. And Poppy, 14 years old, 300 miles away, holding it together better than anyone, had a right to expect what Linnet did. And there it was, the thing she had been holding down all day, coming up her throat like a wave. Linnet said she got cold at a bar. She handed the phone back and stood there shaking, and Gaspare did not touch her, and she noticed that too. He said the time back to her, 12:30. He asked if she heard it. She said she heard it, and his face went somewhere and he told her what it meant. And it was worse than anything she had thought of on her own. Whoever sent that photograph had not been threatening her at 3:42. They had had a man on that fence for 3 hours before the picture existed. The picture was the last step, not the first. She asked what that meant. He said it meant they had not been asking him for anything. He set his palm flat on the table and laid it out, no demand, no number, no terms, 4 words and a photograph delivered 8 minutes after it was taken. He looked up at her and said, "That was not a ransom. That was an announcement." She asked to who. He said to him. A muscle moved in his jaw. He said somebody in his house wanted him to know they could reach the one thing he had just promised to protect, and wanted him to know it 8 minutes after it happened, so he would feel exactly how slow he was. Because the vote was in 90 days. And a man who could not protect his own wife's family did not get to sit at the head of a table. Linnet sat with that for a long moment. Then she reached over and picked up the ring. Gaspare did not say anything. He watched her turn it over twice in her fingers. She asked him flat whether putting it back on actually stopped anyone, or whether it was just a story he told to make old men behave. He said both. She said that was not an answer. He said it was the truest one he had. Then he leaned forward and told her exactly what it did and exactly what it did not do, and she respected him for the second half more than the first. It stopped every outsider completely. Every creditor, every crew, every man in this city who did arithmetic before he did violence. For them, that ring was a wall, and it was a wall they would not climb. And it did nothing at all against somebody who ate at his mother's table. Linnet nodded slowly and said, "Then it was not a wall." She slid it onto her finger and it fit, and she hated that it fit. She said it was a seat at a table where she got to watch their faces. Gaspare went very quiet and told her to say that again. She said he had told her the man was one of 6 who came to Sunday dinner. So she was going to Sunday dinner. He said absolutely not. She said he needed a wife on paper. He had said so himself. But nobody in the history of the world had ever been introduced to a piece of paper. If he wanted 6 men to believe that a woman with no history had walked into his life 3 months before the most important vote of his career, and believe it hard enough that they stopped looking at her, then they had to meet her. And while they were busy deciding whether she was real, she would be sitting at that table watching 6 men's hands. He said she was a court reporter. She said yes. She said she sat 8 hours a day, 4 feet from people committing perjury, and typed every word of it while they did it. She said she could tell when a man told the same story twice and changed one word in the middle of it. She said she could hear the exact half second where somebody stopped remembering and started constructing, because she had heard that half-second 10,000 times and gotten paid to catch it. She held his eyes and told him he had spent his whole life around men who lied for a living, and that his ear had gone dead. Hers had not. Gaspare stood up and walked away from her and stood with his back to the room for a long moment. And when he turned around, something in his face had changed in a way she could not name. He said if she did this, she did not get to do it halfway. He said his mother would ask how they met. His uncle would ask what her father did. Somebody would ask why there was no ring in any photograph before Friday, and she would need an answer, and it would have to be one she could say the same way twice. She said then, give her the answers. He said there was one more rule, and that it was not negotiable. If she sat at that table, and she heard it, she said nothing. Not a word, not a look, not a breath. Because the second one of those men knew she could hear him, she stopped being a wife and started being a witness. He paused and said the rest of it, that he could protect a wife. Linnet swallowed and said understood. He told her to say it back to him. She said if she heard it, she said nothing, she did nothing, and she told only him. Her voice did not shake, which surprised her more than it surprised him. She asked when dinner was. He said Sunday 6 o'clock, 4 days. She said then she needed 4 days of everything he knew about 6 men. He said 5 men. Beau did not have a phone. She said 6. She said because Beau was the only living person who knew where her sister was, and if she was wrong about him, she wanted to be wrong on purpose instead of by accident. Gaspare looked at her for a long, strange moment, and then he almost smiled. It was the first one all day, and it was not a happy thing. He said she was going to be a problem. For them. For everybody. He picked up his jacket and told her to sleep, that her sister landed at 10. And then he stopped in the doorway and said there was one more thing. And it was the last one today. She asked what. He said that on Sunday his mother was going to look at the ring on her hand. And then he said it was his grandmother's. That his mother had given it to him at his father's funeral and told him not to waste it. Linnet's head came up. She said he had told her it was made. He said he had told her it was legal and it was filed. He had never said where it came from. He turned the watch on his wrist once and stopped. He said he had 11 seconds in a chapel and 1 ring in his pocket, and he gave her the one he had. Poppy landed at 10 and hit Linnet at a dead run. And Linnet held on to her 14-year-old sister in a hallway that belonged to a man she had known for 1 day, and did not cry and did not let go for a very long time. The 4 days after that were not what she expected, because the men did not come with mustaches and stories. They came with grandchildren and back injuries and grudges about parking spaces. Gaspare gave her all of it flat, the way he gave her everything. His uncle Marc Antonio, who had wanted the chair since 1998, and made no secret of it, which Gaspare said was the one point in his favor. The cousin who owed a bookmaker in Raleigh and had lied about paying it off. 2 terminal men, one who talked constantly and one who never talked at all. And Gaspare said the quiet one frightened him more, but that he had never once been able to say why. And Weston Culliver, who had married his sister 11 years ago, who had carried his father's coffin, who sat with his mother every Tuesday for 4 months after the funeral, and who called Gaspare by a nickname nobody else in the family was allowed to use. Linnet asked him on the 3rd night whether he had ever suspected any of them. He said no. She let a beat go by and asked it a different way. She asked whether anyone had ever come to him about any of them. And he said no again. And something in the second no was a quarter tone flatter, latter than the first, and Linnet Ashby, who caught that kind of thing for a living, wrote it down in her head and said nothing at all. Sunday came. She wore a dress she chose herself and did not ask his opinion. His mother took her face in both hands at the door and cried, actually cried. And Linnet, who had rehearsed every answer for 4 days, was not prepared for that and felt something ugly move in her chest because she was about to lie to a woman who was happy. The uncle asked what her father did. She said he had been a lineman and he had died in 2011, which was true. And she said it the way she would say it in 10 years, which was the part Gaspare had drilled into her. The cousin asked where the wedding was, and she said Nassau in March, and did not decorate it. The quiet terminal man said nothing at all to her for 2 hours, and looked at her exactly twice. And Weston Culliver was the warmest man in the room. He got up to help his mother-in-law with the plates. He teased Gaspare about the watch. He asked Linnet 3 questions about herself, and listened to all 3 answers. And at one point, he touched her shoulder as he went past her chair and told her the family had needed something good for a while. Then sometime after the plates went out and the coffee came, he told a story about a boat deal that had gone wrong in Morehead City. A broker who had sold him the wrong hull with the right paperwork, and he landed the punchline. The way a man lands a line, he has used 100 times. Wrong bird, he said, but the cage still fits. Nobody laughed particularly hard. The uncle grunted. The cousin asked whether he had gotten his money back. Linnet Ashby did not move. She passed the cream. She complimented the fish. She asked Gaspar's mother about the plates and heard herself do it, and heard how normal she sounded, and thought distantly that she was better at this than she had any business being. Because 6 days earlier, she had sat at a kitchen counter with a legal pad at 8 in the morning and written down the only piece of Friday night her brain had kept. Not an image, not a face, a sound. A man's voice above her in the dark hoarse, close enough that she felt it in her teeth, saying 7 words. She had written them down because writing down what people actually said was the only thing she had ever been good at. Wrong bird, but the cage fits. She got through dessert. She got through the goodbyes. She let Weston Culliver kiss her on the cheek at the door and tell her again that the family had needed something good. And she smiled at him. And she was surprised at how easy it was. And she would think about how easy it was for years afterward. They were 4 minutes into the drive before she said anything. And when she did, it was 2 words and a last name. Gaspare did not react at first. His hands stayed at 10 and 2. He drove another half block and then pulled the car to the curb and put it in park, and Linnet realized he had done that because his hands had started shaking, and he did not want her to see it happen at speed. He asked her how sure she was. She said she was not sure of the man. She was sure of the sentence. She told him what she had done 6 days ago at 8 in the morning at a kitchen counter. How she had written down the only thing her brain kept from Friday night, which was not a face and not a room, but a voice hoarse and close, saying 7 words above her in the dark. She told him she had written them down because that was the entire skill she had, that she had been taking down other people's exact words for 11 years. And she did not paraphrase, she did not smooth, she did not improve. She said she had the legal pad in her bag right now, dated in her handwriting, and that she had never once repeated that sentence out loud to anybody, including him. Gaspare said the 7 words back to her quietly, and she said yes. That was it. Exactly that, in that order. He asked whether it could be a common expression, a boat thing, a thing men said around a marina. She said maybe. She said in 11 years of transcripts, she had never typed it once, and that she would swear to that in front of anyone he liked. But that maybe. He said good. He said keep saying maybe. He said the minute she stopped saying maybe, she would start seeing it everywhere. And then he put both hands on the wheel and said nothing for a long time. She asked him what he wanted to do. He said he wanted to walk into his sister's kitchen and put a hand on the back of that man's neck and have it finished before he understood it had started. She said, and then. He said, and then his sister was a widow, and the vote went to his uncle, and the port stayed dirty for another 60 years, and Linnet went home to a life she could never explain to anyone, and he became exactly the thing she had spent a week refusing to be married to. She said so he was not going to. He said he had not said that. He said he wanted to, and that wanting it was the whole job some days, and not doing it was the rest. Linnet looked at the dashboard for a while and then said they were going to do it the other way. He said there was no other way. She said there was always another way, he just did not like how long it took. Then she turned in the seat and said, the thing that changed the shape of the next 4 days, Weston had stayed in front of him for 11 years, because Weston was inside the information. So stop giving him information. Gaspare said Weston was the operations liaison. He was the information. She said then feed him something. One thing, something nobody else on earth had been told. And then sit back and watch where it came out. He went very still and asked her to say that again. She said in a courtroom, when 2 witnesses got their story from the same lawyer, you did not catch them on the big lie. You caught them because they both used the same strange little phrase, one nobody says by accident. She said, a wrong detail is a fingerprint. Put one wrong detail into the record and then wait to see who repeats it. He looked at her in the dark for a long moment and said, that was not a court reporter idea. She said it absolutely was. She said it was the only idea a court reporter ever had. The wrong detail was a container. Number 4417 North Berth, 2 in the morning on Thursday. Gaspare told exactly one person in the study, with the door shut, in the tone of a man who hated hearing himself say it out loud. He said it was the last dirty load. He said after Thursday everything moved clean, and he said the word family twice, because Weston Culliver had never in 11 years failed to respond to that word. Weston said he understood. He said it warmly. He gripped Gaspare's shoulder on his way out the door. Linnet watched from the top of the stairs, and later she would tell Poppy that she had never in her life seen anything uglier than a man being kind on purpose. Wednesday night, Poppy found her sitting on the hallway floor with her back to the wall at 1 in the morning and slid down beside her without being invited. Poppy said she was doing the thing. Linnet asked what thing. Poppy said the thing where she sat on the floor. She said, Linnet did it when the insurance company denied the claim, and she did it when their mom's headstone came back with the wrong dates. Linnet said she was fine. Poppy said okay. Linnet said she was scared and asked if that was better. It was better. Poppy said, yeah, actually, and knocked her shoulder into her sister's and said it was a lot better. They sat there a while, and then Poppy said he was a good guy. Linnet said he was not a good guy. Poppy said, okay, but he was a guy trying very hard to become one in front of witnesses at a cost that was clearly killing him. Linnet rubbed her eyes and said, "That was not the same thing." Poppy thought about it longer than Linnet expected and said, "No, it wasn't. But it might be rarer." And then she asked if Linnet liked him, and Linnet told her to go to bed, and Poppy said that was a yes and went. At 1:52 on Thursday morning, federal agents took 11 men off the North Berth at Container 441 scene. There was nothing inside it. There had never been anything inside it. But there were 11 men standing around an empty steel box at 2 in the morning with cutting equipment and 2 vehicles registered to a shell company, and a federal agent named Mira Sandoval had been photographing all of it for 40 minutes before anyone touched a bolt. At 2:04, Gaspare's phone rang. He put it on speaker on the kitchen counter, set it down between them, and neither of them touched it. Weston's voice came out tight. He said they had a problem. He said there were feds on the berth. Gaspare said he knew. Weston asked how. Gaspare said because he was looking at them. And then he asked very evenly who else Weston had told. There were 2 seconds of nothing. 2 seconds is a very long time. Weston said nobody. He said Christ nobody. He asked if Gaspare was saying somebody had. Gaspare said he was saying he had told one person. And the line went quiet in a way that had a floor missing under it. When Weston spoke again, his voice had changed. It had gone flat and reasonable, and it was so much worse than shouting. He said Gaspare should think carefully about how that sounded. He said he should be very careful about how that sounded. He said he had been careful for 11 years. He said he had carried Gaspare's father's coffin. He said he had sat with Gaspare's mother every Tuesday for 4 months after. And did Gaspare remember that, or had he stopped remembering things that were inconvenient? Gaspare's hand flattened on the counter, and he asked him one question. He asked him to say that he had never put anything in a girl's drink. Weston did not say it. What Weston said pleasantly was that Gaspare ought to ask his wife how she was sleeping. And then he said Charlotte was a nice town. The call ended. Linnet's whole body went cold in a way she had not gone cold even in the bedroom on the first morning. And Gaspare picked the phone up and did not throw it, which she understood was an act of enormous physical discipline. She said he just admitted it. Gaspare said no. He said Weston had admitted nothing, and that a jury would hear a frightened man being threatened by his brother-in-law, and that Weston knew that when he said it, which was the entire point. She asked what he meant. He said Weston had not been talking to them. He had been building a version. They found out at 6:40 how right he was. Weston Culliver had gone to Gaspar's mother's house at 5 in the morning. He had sat in her kitchen and wept and told her that her son had lost his mind, that her son had set his own people up for the FBI, that 11 men were in federal custody, and one of them was her nephew's best friend, and that he did not know how to say this to her, but he could not sit on it. By 7, Mark Antonio had called an emergency sit-down. By 8:30, the family believed it. Linnet said he was fast. Gaspare said he had had 11 years to practice being believed. He was pulling his jacket on while he said it, and she asked him where he was going, and he told her the shape of the problem. In about 9 seconds, Weston could not get him killed. Weston could get him removed. If the vote moved up, and Gaspare walked into that room with nothing but his own word, his uncle took the chair, and Weston ran the port through his uncle. And every little thing Gaspare had built for 3 years died in a room full of people who loved him. She asked what the answer was. He said evidence the man could not talk his way out of. He said Weston kept paper because Weston did not trust servers. and that the paper lived where his sister did the books for their charter business. Linnet's stomach turned over and she said he was going to his sister's house. He said he was going to send someone to his sister's house. She asked if he was sending Beau. He said yes. She said then send her with him. He said no. She said his name. And he said no again. And it cracked out of him for the first time in 9 days, and he told her why. Because Weston Culliver had said the name of her sister's town on a phone call 4 hours ago. And because Gaspare had exactly one nightmare left in him, and she was standing in the middle of it. Linnet said she had one too. She said it was the one where she sat in a chair for 2 hours. That stopped him. She said it quieter after that. She said his sister would not open the door to a stranger at 9 in the morning. But she would open it for her because that woman had hugged her before she knew her last name and had cried into her hair and had told her the story of the ring while holding her hand at the table. She said his sister would put coffee on and want to talk about the wedding, and Beau could go where he needed to go, and nobody would have to break anything. Gaspare closed his eyes and said she would be using her. Linnet said yes. Her voice went rough and she did not fight it. She said she would carry that for the rest of her life. But she said if she did not, then that woman stayed married to a man who put something in a stranger's drink and never knew it. Until one day she found it out from a prosecutor in a hallway instead of from somebody who loved her. He opened his eyes and said, 20 minutes. That was all she got. Serafina Culliver put coffee on before Linnet finished apologizing for the hour. She talked about the charter boat. She talked about her boys. One of them had a tournament. The other one had decided he was a vegetarian on Tuesday and had eaten a hot dog on Wednesday. She said Weston had left before dawn and had not answered his phone all morning, and she laughed about it. She said he did that. He got a thing in his head. And Linnet Ashby sat at her kitchen table with both hands around a mug and lied by saying nothing at all, which she would later decide was the worst thing she did that entire year. At minute 14, Serafina stopped talking and asked her what was wrong. Linnet said nothing. Serafina said she had stirred that coffee 8 times and there was nothing in it. Linnet set the spoon down, and that was when Beau appeared in the kitchen doorway with a green accordion folder under his arm. Nobody moved for what felt like a very long time. Serafina turned her head and saw a strange, enormous young man standing in her house holding her husband's papers. She said her sister-in-law's name like a question. Linnet said her name back. Serafina asked who that was, and then she asked again louder. And then she stood up so fast the chair went over behind her, and she told them to get out of her house. Linnet said, please. Serafina said, get out of her house, and she was shaking. And she said Linnet had come here and sat at her table. And it was the way she said the word table that broke it. Like the table was a person Linnet had hurt. And Linnet heard her own mouth open and heard the truth come out of it before she could stop it. She said he put something in her drink. She said it on Friday in a bar on Front Street in a glass a friend handed her. The room stopped. Serafina's face did something Linnet would never be able to describe to anyone afterward. It did not crumple. It went blank. And then it went blank a second deeper way like a house losing power, one floor at a time. She said that was not true. Linnet said there was a talk screen. Serafina said that was not true. And she said her husband's name. And then she looked at the green folder in Beau's hands. And something behind her eyes changed gear entirely. And she stopped being a wife defending a man and became a woman who kept books. She asked in a voice like a child's, which folder. Bo said, "Ma'am." She said he had 3. She said the green one was the boat. And then she said the thing that took Linnet's legs out from under her. She said the green one is the boat. So if you are taking the green one, then somebody already told you which one to take. And the only person alive who knows which folder is, which is me. Because I do the books. Linnet started to speak, and Serafina held up one hand and did not lower it. She said she had told her brother 2 years ago. She said she had told Gaspare that her husband's numbers were wrong, and that Gaspare had told her to leave it alone. Linnet turned and looked at Bo, and Bo Tarleton, 26 years old, looked at the floor. Linnet did not remember the drive back. She remembered walking into the study with the green folder in her hand and putting it down hard enough to knock over a glass. And she remembered her own voice saying 2 years. Gaspare looked up. She said his sister told him 2 years ago that the numbers were wrong, and he told her to leave it alone. Her voice was shaking, and she let it shake. She said he knew before the van, before the chapel, before he sat across a table from her and told her the truest thing he had. He already knew. There was a rotten man in his house, and he let that man keep eating dinner with his mother. He said yes. She asked why. He said because that man was married to his sister. He said he had no proof, and that if he had moved on, nothing but a feeling, he would have taken her husband away and her son's father away on his word alone. And she would have spent the rest of her life believing her brother did it out of jealousy. He stood up and said, so he watched him instead. 2 years. He kept him close and fed him nothing that mattered and told himself he was managing it. And then he said the rest, and it came out of him like something being pulled. He said, and then he took a woman off Front Street. Linnet said he had let a snake stay in the house to protect his sister's marriage, and a stranger in a borrowed coat paid for it. He said yes. He said that was exactly what he had done. She was crying and too angry to wipe her face. She said he should have told her on day 1, in that room. With the annulment on this table, he should have said, by the way, I have suspected this man for 2 years and never once acted on it. He said he knew, and his voice was raw when he said the reason, because if he had, she would have signed it and gone home. And he had wanted her to stay. And he had told himself for 9 days that it was about the vote. He looked at her and said it had not been about the vote. Linnet went very still and said, don't. He said she had asked him for the truth every single day for 9 days. She said not that one. He said that one was the truth, too. And her phone rang. She looked down at the screen, and the world tilted because it said Poppy, and Poppy was upstairs, 40 feet above her head, asleep. She answered it, and Weston Culliver, calm as a Sunday afternoon, told her not to run up the stairs, sweetheart. He said the kid was fine. He said she was sitting right here eating a bowl of cereal at 11 in the morning, which he had to say was a hell of a way to live. Linnet could not make a sound. He told her to put her husband on. Linnet Ashby did not put her husband on. She put the phone hard against her ear and heard her own voice come out of her chest in a register she had never used in her life. And she said his name, and then she said, say hers. He said what? She said he told her the girl was fine. So say her name. There was 3/4 of a second of nothing. He said Poppy. She asked what she was eating. He said he had told her. Cereal. She said what kind. And Weston Culliver, who had stood in front of that family for 11 years without a single crack in him, made the first mistake of his entire life at 11:04 on a Thursday morning. He said, does it matter? Linnet's knees went out from under her, and Gaspare caught her elbow, and she shoved him off because she needed to stay standing more than she needed to be held. She said his name into the phone. She said it flat the way she read a docket number. She said he was not with her sister. She said Poppy was asleep upstairs, 40 feet above her head, and he had seen a phone number in a stolen contact list, and he had gambled on it. Weston did not say anything, and Linnet let her voice shake because it was going to shake anyway. And she had decided a week ago that she was done pretending otherwise. She told him exactly what he had just handed her. She said he had just told her precisely how much he had, which was nothing. She said he was sitting somewhere alone, with a phone calling a woman he had drugged, hoping she panicked faster than she thought. She said he had spent 11 years being the smartest man in every room he walked into, and it had cost him about 4 seconds to prove he was not. He said something then low and ugly, and she cut him off and told him to finish it. She said, say the whole sentence. She said say it slowly, because she had a federal agent's card in her coat pocket, and she was going to repeat every word he said into a room with her sister's name in it. He hung up. Linnet stood there with the dead phone in her hand and started laughing. And about 4 seconds in, it turned into something else entirely. And this time when Gaspare caught her, she let him. She said into his shoulder that he had guessed. She said he guessed, and she caught it. Gaspare had his hand flat on the back of her head, and he said her name and told her to breathe. He told her Poppy was 40 feet up, with 2 men on that door. He told her to breathe. She did. And then she pulled back, wiped her face with both hands, and said, "Now finish him." They finished him in 11 hours, and none of it looked like anything from a movie. Mira Sandoval came to the house at 2 in the afternoon and sat at the kitchen counter with her hands folded. And Gaspare Ruvolo slid a green accordion folder across the stone to a federal agent inside his own home. She asked him if he understood what was in it. He said he did. She asked if he understood that some of those pages had his signature on them. He said 14 of them. He said he had counted. Sandoval looked at him for a long moment and asked the only question that mattered to her, which was why. And he said because the man who wrote the rest of it put something in his wife's drink. Linnet watched the agent's face change by exactly 1 degree and thought that is the first time in 11 years anybody has believed him. The deal was ugly, and it took until midnight. Roselle Tandy fought every clause of it like a woman being personally insulted and lost most of them, and made them bleed for the ones she lost. Gaspare gave up the North Berth entirely. He gave up 2 shell companies and a leasing arm that had been in his family since 1974. He signed something that meant he would be looking over his shoulder at a government lawyer for the next 6 years, and that his mother's house would have a lien on it if he so much as filed a form late. At 11:40, Sandoval put her pen down and told him that his brother-in-law was going to stand up in front of everyone he loved and say that Gaspare set him up. He said Weston would say worse than that. She said his wife was Gaspare's sister. He said yes. She said this was going to cost him the family. And Gaspare said yes. He said that was the price. He said he had known the price since Sunday. Linnet did not tell him then or later that she had watched him say it and understood that he meant since the second she got out of that car and told him a name. Weston Culliver was arrested on a Tuesday in the parking lot of a marina in front of nobody at all. There was no confession. He never gave one. He lawyered up inside 90 seconds, and he was still insisting on his innocence. 8 months later, when the talk screen and the bar's camera footage and the payment routing and his own paper ledger finished the argument on his behalf. But the thing that actually ended it was not any of that. It was Serafina. She walked into the U.S. Attorney's office on a Thursday morning with 2 years of the charter company's books in a canvas grocery bag and told them she had made every entry herself and would explain every line. Linnet found out that night and drove across town without telling anybody and sat in the driveway for 11 minutes before she was brave enough to knock. Serafina opened the door and looked at her and said she was not ready. Linnet said she knew. Serafina said she might never be ready. Linnet said she knew that too. Serafina said she sat at my table. And Linnet said she did. She said her throat had closed up, but she said the rest of it anyway, that she would do it again, and that she would be sorry about it for the rest of her life. And that both of those things were true at the same time. And she was not going to pretend one canceled the other. Serafina stood in the doorway a long moment. Then she said the boys asked about him every night. Linnet asked what she told them. And Serafina said she told them that their father did something to a woman, and that he was going to have to answer for it. Her chin came up and her eyes spilled over, and she said she was not going to raise 2 boys who thought a man was allowed to do that if enough people liked him. Linnet went up the steps and Serafina let her, and they stood in that doorway holding on to each other for a long time. Serafina said into her hair that she was not forgiving her yet. Linnet said that was fair. Serafina said, but she was still her brother's wife. And Linnet said actually that part was complicated. It stayed complicated for exactly 9 more days, because on the 10th the council met. Marcantonio had forced it up the calendar, which everyone understood was the whole strategy. Get them in a room, while half the family still believed the version Weston had handed them at 5 in the morning in a crying woman's kitchen. 31 days into 90, Gaspar walked into a room full of men who had spent a month deciding whether he was a traitor or the only honest thing his family had produced in 60 years. Linnet was not supposed to be there. She went anyway. She stood at the back in a dress she had chosen herself and listened to Marcantonio Ruvolo talk for 18 minutes about how his nephew had handed the port to the federal government and burned down what his brother built. He was good at it. He did not shout. He said Gaspare's father's name 4 times and got quieter every time. And Linnet, who had heard 1,000 closing arguments and typed every word of them, thought coldly that the man had rehearsed it in a car. And when he finished, Gaspare did not argue. He said his uncle was right. He said he gave them the berth. He said he gave them the leasing arm. He said he gave them 14 documents with his own name on them, and that he did it on purpose. The room made a sound. He said he would do it again on Monday. And then he said the thing Linnet would remember for the rest of her life. And he never once raised his voice while he said it. He said he had watched this family spend 6 decades protecting men they personally liked. He said Weston Culliver ate at his mother's table for 11 years, carried his father's coffin, and drugged a court stenographer for money. And he said every single man in that room would have voted to keep him if Gaspare had moved on him without paper. So he got paper. He said that was the entire crime they were charging him with. He said he stopped protecting a man everybody liked. Nobody spoke. And then Ozzy Pilato stood up in the back, 68 years old, 31 years driving Ruvolo women. A man who ate in the kitchen because he had always eaten in the kitchen and had never once been asked to sit anywhere else. He said he drove Serafina to that office. He said she asked him to. He looked around the room and said she was shaking so badly she could not work the door handle, and that he had to reach across and do it for her. He said he sat in that car for 2 hours and thought about all of them. Then he sat back down. The vote was not close. Afterward, in a hallway, Linnet said 90 days. Gaspare said what? She said he had told her 90 days. It had been 31. He turned the silver watch on his wrist once and stopped, and told her that Roselle still had the annulment. Still signed, still dated. She would file it Monday if Linnet told her to, and he would not contest a line of it, same as day one. Linnet said she knew. He said she never had to see him again. She said she knew that too. She folded her arms and asked if she could ask him something. He said anything. She asked why he kept giving her exits. Gaspare was quiet a second, and then he said, because somebody took her choice away in a bar, and he could not give that back. So he gave her every other one he had. Linnet looked at the floor for a while. Then she said he had asked her a question once at midnight about 4 days ago, and she had told him it was not a fair question. And he had told her to go find the true sentence, the one she could say without lying, and come back with it whenever she had it. She said she found it. She looked up and told him that she did not choose him in that chapel. She could not have. She was not there. But she had chosen him every single morning since. Awake, sober, with the door unlocked, and a lawyer's card in her coat pocket, and a signed annulment sitting in a drawer 11 feet away, 31 times in a row. Her voice cracked, and she kept going anyway. She said that was the true sentence. She said she was not in love with the man she married. She said she was in love with the man she kept marrying every morning when nobody made her. Gaspare Ruvolo, who had not lost his composure in front of another human being in 11 years, put a hand over his mouth. He said, "Say it again." She said no. She was laughing and crying at the same time. And she said once was enough, he would get a big head. Weston's trial did not happen for another 11 months, and Linnet testified for 6 hours and 40 minutes, and she did not enjoy 1 second of it. His attorney went after the only thing available, which was her memory. He asked her how a woman with that much of that drug in her bloodstream could possibly recall 7 specific words. He asked it 8 different ways. He suggested she had constructed the sentence afterward. He suggested she had heard her husband say it. He suggested at one point that a woman in her situation might want very badly to be useful to a man like that. Linnet let him finish. Then she told the jury what she did for a living. She told them she had sat 4 feet from that same defense attorney in a hearing in 2019 and taken down every word he said, and that she could tell them what he had eaten for lunch that day because he had complained about it on the record. She told them memory was not the same thing as recall, and that hers had been trained by 11 years of being paid to get it exactly right, and that the one thing a stenographer is professionally incapable of doing is improving what somebody actually said. And then she said the part that Sandoval later told her she thought about for months. She said she wrote those 7 words down on a legal pad on Saturday morning, dated it, and did not repeat them out loud to a living soul. Not to her sister. Not to the man she was married to, not to anyone until the following Sunday night. She said she did that because she had spent her entire adult life watching what happens to a story that gets told out loud too many times. The attorney asked why she would take such a precaution before she suspected anybody, and Linnet said because she did not know yet who she could trust, and she was not going to hand a contaminated record to anybody, including herself. The jury was out for 5 hours. Serafina was in the second row when the verdict came in with her sons at home and her mother-in-law's hand in hers, and she did not make a sound. Afterward, she walked past everyone, including her brother, and stopped in front of Linnet and said one thing. She said, "Thank you for not letting them make it my fault." And then she went outside and threw up in the parking lot, and Linnet held her hair back, and neither of them ever mentioned it again as long as they lived. They did it properly in October, not a chapel at 3:11 in the morning, with a man's hand under her elbow keeping her upright. A garden 40 people, a borrowed folding chair situation that Iolanda complained about for an entire week, and then arranged herself twice because nobody else could be trusted with it. Linnet picked her own dress. She went alone to do it, which mattered more to her than the dress did. And she stood in a fitting room in Wilmington for 20 minutes, not looking at the mirror, just standing there, being a woman who had driven herself somewhere and chosen a thing. Poppy walked her down. 15 by then, 4 inches taller than she had been in the spring. And she cried so hard she had to stop twice, and Linnet had to stop with her. And the second time, Poppy laughed at herself through it and said this was so embarrassing. And Linnet said it absolutely was, and they kept walking. Gaspar's mother cried. Marcantonio came, sat in the back, and did not say one cutting thing all night, which from him amounted to a sonnet. Serafina came. She sat in the second row with her boys, and she did not smile much, and Linnet had made her peace with that before the day started. But halfway through the vows, Serafina looked at the ground, and then she reached over and took her mother-in-law's hand and held it and did not let go. It was not forgiveness. It was closer to a truce with a door left open on purpose. Linnet took it. The vows were short. She had written 11 drafts and thrown out 10. She held both his hands and told him she knew what he was. She said she knew the worst thing he had ever done and the reasons he did it, and that she knew there would be more of both. She said she was not marrying him because he was good. She said she was marrying him because when it cost him everything, his name, his family, his father's port, his sister's whole life, he told the truth anyway. Then she squeezed his fingers and told him to keep doing that. She said that was all she wanted. That was the entire deal. And Gaspare Ruvolo, who talked like a spreadsheet on the best day of his life, said 7 words and could not get through them without stopping twice. He said she walked in wearing somebody else's coat, and then he stopped, and then he said the rest of it, which was that he wanted her to stay in her own. 7 years is a long time, and it goes fast. The port went legal, then boring, then profitable, which Gaspar insisted was the correct order and said so at parties until people stopped asking. He testified. He took a plea on a paperwork charge that cost him 11 months of supervised release and a great deal of pride. And Linnet drove him to every single check-in and waited in the car with the radio on, and never once said anything about it. And he never once had to ask her to come. The first year was harder than either of them admitted out loud. There were nights she woke at 3:11 exactly, which she refused to find meaningful and could not stop happening. There were 4 months where she could not drink anything she had not poured herself, including water, including at her own kitchen table. Gaspar never commented on it. He just started opening bottles in front of her without being asked. And then one day, about a year and a half in, she noticed he had stopped, because she had stopped, and neither of them said a word about that either. She went to a therapist for 2 years. She told the woman everything, including the part where she was married to the man who had signed her name for her. And the woman asked her once gently whether she had ever considered that she stayed because she was frightened. And Linnet said yes. She said she considered it every week for the first year. And then she said the thing that ended the question, that a woman who is staying out of fear does not keep a signed annulment in her nightstand drawer for 6 years, and she did. And it was still there, and she looked at it about twice a year. And every time she put it back, she felt her whole chest go quiet. She never threw it out. On their 5th anniversary, Gaspare asked if she wanted him to, and she said absolutely not, and he said good. And that was the last time it was ever discussed. Poppy graduated. Then she graduated again. She was supposed to go into nursing and switched in her 2nd year without telling anybody. And Linnet found out when a certification envelope came to the house with her sister's name on it and the words court reporting on the return address. Linnet sat down on the stairs with the envelope in her hands and did not open it. When Poppy came home, Linnet asked her why and asked it carefully because she was afraid of the answer. Poppy said, because she watched her sister sit in a witness box for 6 hours and 40 minutes and take apart a man who was very good at his job, using nothing but the fact that she had written 7 words on a legal pad and dated it. She said she wanted to be the person in the room who gets it exactly right. Linnet cried in the kitchen for 10 minutes and then made her sister a sandwich because she was 36 years old, and that was still the only way she knew how to say anything. Bo Tarleton runs the North Berth, now the one the family lost, and then leased back clean 4 years later, which Gaspare called poetry, and Roselle Tandy called an unnecessary tax exposure. He has a wife and a daughter and a habit of telling people at parties that he once flew to Charlotte on 90 seconds notice for a woman he had met twice, and that it remains the single best decision anyone has ever made on his behalf. Iolanda is 80 and refuses to retire, and has begun referring to the wedding as the one which nobody corrects. Ozzy Pilato died in the spring of the 4th year. He had a stroke in his own driveway and was gone before the ambulance got there. 200 people came. Gaspare spoke and got about 4 sentences in before he had to stop. And it was Serafina who stood up out of the 2nd row and walked to the front and stood next to her brother, not touching him, just standing there until he could finish. That was the day it turned. Not a conversation, not an apology. A woman standing up in a room and deciding in front of everybody whose side of the aisle she was going to walk to. She forgave Linnet a year before that in year 3 at a kitchen sink drying a dish. She did it sideways, the way the women in that family asked anything that mattered. She said she had been thinking about the coffee. Linnet said what coffee? And Serafina said the 8 times, with nothing in the cup, and said she had figured out about a year ago that Linnet had been trying to make herself say it since the second she sat down. Then she said she was not going to make her carry it anymore. Linnet cried so hard she dropped the plate and it broke. And Serafina said, good, she hated those plates. They were a wedding present. Weston Culliver is still in a federal facility in another state. He has never admitted a single thing. He writes to his sons twice a year, and they have never answered, which Serafina says is their decision and not hers, and which Linnet believes about 70% of the time. He wrote to Linnet once in year 2. She did not open it. She drove it to Mira Sandoval's office in a sealed bag and handed it across the desk, and said she did not want to know what a man like that thought he had to say to her. And Sandoval said, That was the healthiest thing she had heard all month. Britt Kesner did not speak to Linnet for almost a year. Not out of anger. Out of the specific, unbearable shame of having handed a friend a coat. She sent a card at Christmas that said 11 words, and then nothing for 8 months. And then one afternoon, she just showed up at the house and stood on the step and said she did not know how to be around her. And Linnet, who had thought about this exact conversation about 200 times, said the only line she had, that if Britt kept punishing herself for it, then the men who did it got to take 2 women that night instead of 1. Britt was a bridesmaid in October. She still calls every year on the anniversary of the Friday, and every year Linnet tells her the same thing. And every year Britt needs to hear it, and Linnet has never once let on that it is tiring, because it is not. On Tuesday and Thursday afternoons in a rented room on the wrong side of the port, Linnet Ruvolo teaches machine shorthand to 14 kids whose parents work the terminal, most of whom had never met a person who did that for a living and did not know it was a job you could simply have. And on the first Monday of every month, she does something else, which she does not talk about at parties. She sits for free in small rooms with women who are about to give a statement, women coming out of the worst night of their lives, who cannot get the order right, who keep apologizing for not remembering, who have been told by someone that a gap in their memory means a gap in their credibility. She takes it down. Exactly. Every stumble, every correction, every "I don't know." She does not smooth it, and she does not improve it, and she tells each of them the same thing at the start, which is that not remembering is not the same as not knowing, and that the record is not there to make them look good. It is there to make them true. Sandoval sends most of them. Their daughter is 5. Her name is Nella, after Gaspare's mother, and there is a ring in a box in a drawer waiting for her. And by universal family agreement, she is an absolute menace. She has her father's exact stillness when she is thinking, and her mother's exact instinct for repeating back verbatim and at maximum volume the single worst thing any adult in the room has said that week. On their 7th anniversary, the second one, the sober one, the one they actually count Gaspara, gave her a plain band with 4 words cut inside it. Linnet turned it over twice before she read them. You chose this one. She held it for a while and then said that people tell this story wrong. He asked how. She said Britt's kids think a mafia boss married a court reporter. She said that was the version that traveled, because that version was easy, and it had a villain and a rescue in it, and you could tell it in one sentence at a barbecue. She said that was not what happened at all. She said what happened was that a man was drowning in his own last name, and had been for 11 years, and had built an entire life out of protecting people he liked, instead of doing the thing that was right, and it was killing him slowly, and he could not see it. And a woman in a borrowed coat walked into the middle of it and refused flatly, from the first morning before she knew a single thing about him, to be an object that somebody handled. She said that was the story. Everything else was decoration. Then she slid the ring on. Gaspare Ruvolo looked at his wife for a long moment and said, "Say it again." And Linnet said no. She said once was enough. She woke up in a stranger's house with a ring she never chose, and a marriage she never agreed to, and a needle mark inside her own elbow. She did not run. She did not surrender. She did not let one single man, not the one who drugged her, not the one who married her, not the one who tried to take her sister, decide what her life was going to mean. She stayed because staying was the harder thing, and she had decided to do the harder thing. She listened when everyone around her had stopped hearing. She caught him with 7 words written down at a kitchen counter on a Saturday morning, dated in her own hand, because getting it exactly right was the one thing she had never let anybody take from her. And then she chose it every morning. Awakes her on purpose with the door unlocked, and the way out sitting in a drawer 11 feet away. That is why it held